Am I the jerk for exposing my brother's affair with my ex at my wedding? Now his pregnant wife wants a divorce. I apologize in advance for making this a lengthy read. Last week, Beth, 25, the love of my life, and I, 32, were married. The wedding ceremony was lovely, although to be honest, there was some unnecessary drama. My brother may have to deal with a divorce as a result of what transpired. The family is berating me day and night, demanding that I make amends, and hell has fallen upon me, but I honestly don't think I'm at fault, which is why I've come here to get advice and insights. My brother, Paul, 34, and I don't get along well. As children, we were pretty close as two brothers can be anyway, although we had our share of arguments. Our connection as siblings was never tense. We got along well because I knew he had my back and I had his. Our parents always prioritized family and made an effort to teach us the same principles. Regretfully, I was the only one who exhibited those principles. I began dating Stacy, now 32, 6 years ago when I was 26 years old. Everyone knew that I was very in love with her. She belonged to the same circle of friends that I was then hanging out with, and I fell in love with her right away. She was everything to me: intelligent, beautiful, tall, witty, and attractive. I totally forgot about her poison since I was so enamored with her. She was toxic. Boy, my life became consumed by drama the moment I began dating her. Although she was a wonderful girl, she wasn't my match. We were completely incompatible. She was completely confrontational, whereas I was not. She was a drama queen, literally living for it. Every other week, there was a fresh argument about something that, in my opinion, was unimportant, but I kept ignoring all the warning signs because I was so enamored with her. After 6 months of dating, I discovered she was having an affair with a coworker. I was devastated when I accidentally found out. She denied it until I challenged her, at which point she broke down and spoke clean. Despite my sadness, she apologized profusely. She admitted her error and promised to try her hardest to win back my trust. I foolishly trusted her, despite my knowledge that I shouldn't. I gave her another chance. I've never been disproven in my belief that cheaters never change. I've known cheats my entire life, and none of them were able to change their habits, because I thought, or rather hoped, that this time would be different. I gave her a chance despite knowing all of that. I was mistaken. It was all okay for the first couple weeks. I felt that perhaps we could get past the tragedy and start a new life together, so I began to trust her once more. However, after 3 or 4 months, I began to have a persistent sense that something was off. She was behaving suspiciously and shadily. I justified her actions because I lacked evidence and didn't want to think she was cheating once more. However, the sensation persisted. At last, I asked her if she had anything to tell me or if something was happening. She got defensive and accused me of having unfounded suspicions about her. She claimed that in order to save her time in trying to regain my trust, I should have informed her if I had decided never to trust her again. She deceived me into thinking I was being suspicious. I trusted her. Weeks went by with no change in her behavior. I started secretly checking her phone since the overanalyzing was making me nuts. I should have realized the relationship was over at that moment. I had absolutely no faith in her. I should have left even if I hadn't discovered anything, because I believed she was capable of cheating. However, I'm happy I persisted because I discovered something that fundamentally altered my life, and it hasn't been the same since. It took me a long time to realize what was going on, but when I did, I felt like I had been hit in the face. In essence, she had been unfaithful to me for some time, but not just with anyone. She was seeing Paul instead of me. When I saw those texts, I was hurt as I had never been before. The worst kind of betrayal came from the 2 individuals who were meant to be the closest to me. What I was reading was unbelievable. All it did was make me want to cry uncontrollably and drop on my knees. Stacy came in at that point and noticed me using her phone. She became irate with me, accusing me of violating her privacy. I just threw the phone against the wall, hurried out, and showed her which chat I had open. I believe I spent 3 or 4 hours walking. She contacted me a few times, but I never picked up. She forced Paul to phone me after realizing I wouldn't be speaking to her. I wasn't having any of it when he called once and texted me a few times with phrases like, "I want to explain," and "It's not what you think." I wasn't going to reject my own eyes, and what I had witnessed was sufficient evidence. When I got home, I texted Stacy to tell her to come get her belongings from my house the next day. She called me once more, but I didn't pick up. I was numb for the following few days. I didn't speak with anybody. I was thankful when she arrived, gathered her belongings, and departed without making a scene. After that, Paul made no attempt to get in touch with me. And how could he after what he had done? What could he possibly say to me? I called my folks a week or so later and explained all that had transpired. In addition, I informed them that Paul was deceased and that if he were still alive, I would not be returning home. Although they were upset with the circumstance, they initially stood by me. I liked that they even went up to Paul. According to what I understand, Paul became defensive and said that he and Stacy were in love, but my parents didn't agree. I was appreciative of their help during those initial months. I stopped talking to Paul altogether and began going to therapy. I came to understand how Stacy was to me during treatment. At that point, I started to think that this whole situation was perhaps a blessing in disguise. Although it was extremely painful, it prevented a terrible future for me. I eventually moved on from that episode, but I never spoke to Paul again and never forgave him. I met Beth a few months later, and the rest is history. When we first started dating, our relationship was calm and pleasant, very different from the turbulent one I experienced with Stacy. It wasn't until we decided to get married a few years later that I told my family about Beth. She was fully aware of my predicament with Paul and my reluctance to introduce her to my family. My folks were overjoyed when I eventually presented her to them and announced our engagement. They expressed their happiness and complimented me. They did, however, add that this was a chance to patch things up with Paul. I felt hurt and astonished, given that I had moved on and Paul and Stacy were no longer together. My mother proposed that we move on as brothers and leave the past behind us. I informed her that I would never forgive Paul for betraying me, but I made an effort to remain courteous. It was about my brother's ability to do something so terrible to me, not about Stacy. Mom became irate and said that Paul and I had to be together because we were brothers. I informed her that Paul had shattered the connection of allegiance, which should be reciprocal. Whether or not to forgive him was up to me. When things became heated, Dad stepped in and told Mom to stop talking. Despite her reluctance, she was obviously upset. Mom even attempted to get Beth involved in the awkward dinner in the hopes that she would persuade me to make amends. Beth, however, merely stated that she believed I would make the best choice for me and that I would, if at all, forgive Paul when the time was right. By now, Mom was virtually enraged. She had this idealistic vision of our family as it was and will always be, and I'm not sure why or how she believed that I would simply forget this and move on. She refused to acknowledge that the farce was over and that the family would never return to its previous state. Mom agreed when Dad told her that the subject would not be discussed again. After a period of tension, things between us gradually improved. I had nothing to complain about because she made an effort to be extremely careful of limits and didn't bring up Paul again. I had no idea that my parents were plotting an intervention and were prepared to spoil my wedding. Both Mom and Beth's mother participated in the wedding preparations. She was aware of the dress code, the number of guests, and all the preparations ahead of time. However, my dad didn't participate much in the process. During the preparation phase, Mom didn't do anything unusual. There was not a single mention of Paul. She even said that she was sorry for pushing me so hard that day. She said that she had believed there could be a chance for reconciliation, but that she was mistaken because Paul had harmed me in the most worst way imaginable. Therefore, I had no cause to suspect her or question her motives. However, I was mistaken. My best man, Lance, 32, a school acquaintance, rushed to me on the day of the wedding and said I had an urgent problem that needed to be resolved. When I asked him what was going on, he replied that Paul and his wife had arrived at the location with Mom and Dad. I was furious. I instructed Lance to force them to go. He claimed that although he made an effort to deal with it discreetly, they would not budge. Lance informed them that I would be upset if I saw Paul and that he was not invited. However, Mom asserted that, in contrast to Lance, Paul is your biological brother and that we are relatives. Yes, Mom, you will always pick Paul over Lance, absolutely. The fact that they had plotted all of this behind my back astounded me. They had to give me an explanation right away. What the devil was going on? I asked my dad over the phone. He explained that they felt it was important to include Paul and his wife since they didn't want the family to think there was a divide between the two brothers. He requested that I simply put on a show for a few hours, after which they would depart, and we could all act as though nothing had occurred. He said that everyone would benefit from this and that it wouldn't harm me to comply for the family's sake, since he was aware that I didn't want anything to do with Paul. I told him that he had betrayed my confidence in the same way that his adored son had. I reminded him that one day was my wedding day and he had no right to destroy it. He advised me to quit being theatrical and suck it up for one day. He suggested my flair for theatrics needed to be toned down a touch and emphasized that nobody was destroying everything. I ought to have questioned him about why, on my wedding day, this familial act was so important, yet nobody cared to do the same for Collins. I was too angry to think clearly, though, and I had no idea Paul was married. I didn't think of such things until later. I was just blindly angry at the time. I wanted to rush over and yank them all out by their collars. Whether it created a stir or damaged the family's reputation didn't matter to me. All I wanted was for them to be gone. At that point, Lance approached me with a far less aggressive and more vengeful plan. He proposed that there was only one method to exact revenge on everyone, and if I was cool with it, we could carry it out immediately. Though it was too dramatic for a wedding, the notion felt interesting. Beth's big day was too important to me to spoil. I promised Lance that I would consider it and get back to him. Beth had seen Paul and his wife, but the wedding ceremony went off without a hitch. She wanted to know what was happening. I gave a quick explanation of what had transpired. I drew her aside after the ceremony to ask if she was comfortable with my carrying out Lance's plan. After some hesitation, she finally stated that there was no better time or location than right now if it was what I needed to do to put my family in their proper place. She was totally behind me. I love my wife, God. After thanking her, I advised her to relax and take in the drama. Some stood up to speak when family members and close friends were present for the toasts. Lance laid the groundwork for me by initiating the entire process. We had a straightforward plan. I would toast Paul and tell him about his affair with my ex-girlfriend which caused our split. Paul and my parents would suffer greatly because I intended to go into great depth in my speech. However, they were deserving. My parents deserved it for ignoring my sentiments and just caring about the family's reputation, and Paul deserved it for being a part of it. I got up and declared that I had a toast to give after everyone had completed theirs regarding Beth and me. I started by saying, I want to make a toast to my dear brother, Paul. Paul and my parents went completely white when I started it, but his wife was perplexed. I suspected that she was unaware of the reasons behind Paul and my separation. I was much more irate because she was heavily pregnant. Why would he parade his pregnant wife around at my wedding? I got the impression that his only goal was to steal the thunder. In any case, I went on with my toast. I mentioned that Paul and I had been brothers for a very long time, and that I still wanted to appreciate him despite the fact that he had stabbed me in the back in a manner worse than an enemy. Why? Because I ended up with Beth because of his betrayal. I continued by explaining how at the age of 26, I fell in love with a girl who wasn't the proper fit for me. However, I was too young and naive to see all of her shortcomings. I didn't decide to break up with her until she did the worst thing. I then informed everyone that my ex-girlfriend had cheated on me with my brother, dropping the bombshell. The final blow that caused us to split up, my healing process, and ultimately my meeting with my wife, Beth, was that betrayal. I also didn't spare my folks. I claimed to have harbored resentment for Paul for a very long period, to the extent that we had not spoken for 5 years. However, I was happy that my parents had decided to bring him and his wife in covertly so that I could at last thank Paul for bringing the right people into my life. Although I'm aware that my parents were embarrassed, I wanted that very much. They had crossed all of my boundaries, and I wasn't going to give them away so lightly. It sounded as though my mother might burst into tears at the sound of the crowd's gasps. I had shouted it all for everyone to hear, and there was no way to diffuse the situation. Paul's wife, whose name I don't even know, was staring at him in shock. Paul was unable to look people in the eye. He was completely embarrassed by it, and neither Lance, Beth, nor I did anything to lighten the mood. My parents were sitting there looking at the floor, even though Mom was trying her hardest not to cry. Her faint sniffles could be heard in the quiet room as Dad fidgeted with his fingers. I thought I could hear my heartbeat in the eerie silence because of how tense the mood was. I simply sat down and began eating after finishing my toast. Paul and my family were the center of attention, but no one spoke. At last, his wife stood up, apologized on his behalf, and expressed gratitude to us for letting them join in the festivities. Then she bounded away. I couldn't help but feel awful for making her go through this humiliation when she hadn't done anything wrong. It's unfortunate that she was caught in the crossfire, but I had to hold Paul and my parents responsible. The real fun only started after my parents and my beloved brother left. Since then, though, I've received a ton of texts from my parents, particularly my mother, telling me that I had no right to publicly discuss the family's private issues. She said that in front of everyone I had torn their dignity to shreds. I wanted to enjoy at least portion of my wedding, so I didn't reply. However, Mom went one step farther and began texting Beth. I am aware that it is affecting her. Beth keeps sending messages from new numbers or making new Instagram profiles even after I warned her to block Mom. Beth is suffering greatly as a result of all this negativity, and I feel bad for bringing her into this situation. She is not deserving of it. She saved my life, and now I've brought her down with me. It is incorrect. Mom claims that I was the one who caused the scene at the wedding, even though I've urged her to stop bringing Beth into the drama. Beth and I will now have to deal with the consequences of my actions. She says I am aware that arguing with my mother is futile. Nothing I say will convince her to see reasons since she is obstinate. Also, given that what I did was malicious, I can't really expect her to. I feel awful since my wife is the last person I want to suffer because of my little revenge trip. Update 1. Amy, my sister-in-law, called me. I picked up since I didn't have her number stored. She was really kind and expressed her sincere regret for phoning at such an unexpected time. She said that what Paul told her was totally different, so she wanted to meet me and hear my side of the story. She pleaded with me to keep her visit to me a secret from the rest of the family. She didn't need to fear because I informed her that I don't speak to them anyhow. To be honest, I had conflicting feelings about this. However, Beth reminded me that Amy is expecting a kid and should be aware of Paul's true character. Beth is correct. Despite the fact that this will probably lead to further issues, Amy needs to understand that she is not at blame since she has never mistreated me. I cannot tribute to her life being ruined. I thus consented to meet her. However, I'm somewhat anxious. I don't think things will work out well for Paul because this issue has gotten far worse than I had expected. Am I sorry for Paul? Not at all. That piece of garbage deserves all the awful things that happened to him. I simply don't want to be caught up in family drama once more, especially if Beth is involved. Even though I know it won't go well, I still hope it does. I know that this drama won't end with me meeting Amy today because I witnessed her response to the entire outburst during the wedding. Update 2. I believe the meeting went well. I was quite sorry for her. She arrived by herself, and since she is pregnant, the baby could arrive at any moment. She appeared to have been crying. Fortunately, Beth was present as well, and she somewhat diffused the situation. Amy replied she wanted to hear the entire story again when I asked if she had any questions. I explained everything to her, including how I confronted Paul and how I learned about it. I also described how due to family, Mom had been nagging me to get Paul and I back to normal. I inquired about the tale Paul had shared with Amy. According to her, Stacy fell in love with Paul despite his claims that we were just friends. He claims that I ended our friendship because I couldn't admit that I had always harbored feelings for Stacy. Paul claimed that he and Stacy didn't start dating until a year after I stopped communicating with her, and even then, their time together was short. That was a total falsehood. I told Amy I never cared to inquire or find out how long they dated, so I was unaware of it. I then inquired as to whether Collins's account of events had been supported by my parents. Amy declined. Colin informed her that my parents didn't like talking about me because I had cut everyone off and that it was a very sensitive subject for the family. She said that when she first met my parents, they hardly ever addressed me. I inquired if she had received an invitation to the wedding from my parents. She claimed that Mom was primarily pressuring them to go since they hadn't received an invitation, and Amy was aware of the animosity between Paul and me. She didn't want to attend, but Mom basically used blackmail to get them to go. Paul didn't want to go either, Amy clarified, but Mom insisted that we let bygones be bygones and be a family again for the sake of the kid. She didn't try to check with me because she assumed that I might have told Mom that I wanted Paul there. Furthermore, she never thought that reality would be so different and completely upend her life. Although I felt terrible for her, I was at a loss for what to do. I advised her to contact me if I could be of any assistance because my brother is a terrible person who not only betrays his brother, but also lies to his wife. I don't want her to suffer. She was really furious about the whole situation, which suggests that she plans to proceed with a divorce. All I can hope is that she has a successful outcome. It's challenging to be a single mother. Update 3. Amy has submitted a divorce petition. My father called to let me know. He isn't holding me responsible for everything that occurred. In contrast to Paul and my mother, he simply told me to keep my distance from Paul because he's going through a difficult moment and might try to get in touch with me. I informed him that until they chose to invite Paul to my wedding, I had been avoiding them. He didn't answer that my mom and Paul are apparently attempting to contact me, but I'm secure from their assault because they've been blocked everywhere. Although I am unaware of all the specifics of the divorce, I am aware that Paul is not handling it well because he really loves Amy. I can't help but feel a little smug about karma finally getting back at him. However, I feel sorry for Amy and Meg, and we want to provide Amy with assistance when the baby is born. What about Paul? I have no regrets or feelings of guilt. He is deserving. He purposefully broke me once, and now he's broken himself. When you violate someone's trust and let them down, that's just the way it goes. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.